Wars! They take a couple hundred fencers, amped up on monster and adrenaline, still regretting last night's party crawl, put swords in their hands, and tell them to charge. Somebody has to keep them from hurting themselves and others, so they can all enjoy the fight. So, if marshalling is cat herding, war marshals are running a feral cat rescue. Or they're just crazy cat people. We'll find out tonight on Fighting the World! I'm Wistric.
And I'm Bruce. And welcome back. We know it's been a little bit. We took the month of January off for various holiday and personal reasons, but we are back this week to talk about marshalling large-scale melee and how, hopefully, this is the conclusion I'm hoping we come to, marshals aren't referees. This evening we have 3 guests, which we know is a little bit different from our 4-person panel, but we hope to represent the 3 major wars. And so I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves, where they're from, and just give a quick, brief overview of who you are. I'm going to start with Darius, and then I will work my way through our list. So Darius, you're up.
Hi, I'm Master Darius. I'm from the Middle Kingdom. I've been a marshal for a long time. Let's go with just 10 plus years. I've been to other kingdoms wars. It's a good time. Marshalling is a good service to do. And we'll go on with the introductions. I can talk later.
All right, so that was Darius. He's our representative for Pensic. Next up is Malice.
Hi, everybody. I'm Master Malice McHenry, Maud Laurel from Atenveldt. I travel quite extensively, so if you see the face someplace, yeah, it was probably me visiting, well, pretty much everywhere. I have been a marshal for, let's say, 25 plus years. I have run not just Asteorra War, but a number of other smaller wars in our kingdom, visited wars in, well, just about every kingdom over the course of time.
Mm-hmm.
Spoilers, that is Malice, and he is here representing Asteorra. And then last but not least, Binn.
Hey, I'm Master Binn MacBranain, currently in Ansteorra from Glenavon, and I've been marshalling like maybe 6 months less than I've been playing in the SCA, so it's been a while. I have marshaled and helped marshal Gulf Wars for about, I want to say 4 or 5 times being MIC of Gulf Wars. It was a lot. It was a little spate there. So.
Mud War. All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate you coming to tell us about your experiences marshalling wars and helping keep the marshals in line for your wars. A lot of logistics goes into marshalling large-scale melee, and wars are a whole nother animal. So I wanted to kind of start tonight and give a little bit of an overview of each war and some of the logistical concerns and why they're logistical concerns. So let's start first with, let's talk about Gulf Wars with Binn. First, can you give me a little bit of an overview about Gulf Wars? Like, how many battles are fought as melee? What does the rapier number look like?
So basic numbers, we usually get about, I guess total throughout the week, about 500 or 600 fencers. Most wars are in the 300 range. Usually the largest battle is the field battle. Gulf Wars, when I was marshalling it, and the last year I was marshalling it, there were 3 large-scale wars that were war points, and they added a 4th one there at the end. It's been there for the last, now 3 or 4 years now. So we had the field battle. I think everyone has a field battle. Lots of aerobic exercise, lots of running around. We have the castle battle. There's a fort, and we fight in and out of it. The infamous ravine battle at Gulf Wars. I'm sure we'll hear more about that one later, and the complaints therein, and the fun, hopefully. The last one was a town battle that was a melee with like objectives, like escort the box from this side to the other side, things like that. So it was a little twist on last man standing. So yeah.
Fabulous. And I should have prefaced with this, but just for the audience who hasn't been to Gulf Wars, what time of year is it, and what does the weather look like too? Because that can be a kind of a large concern when having people marshal and for the ravine battle.
Yeah.
What time of year is it normally?
Normally, not
Not
this year.
So normally it's the second week in March. It's spring break for most people. I know some schools don't do the spring break, lines up right, but most of the time it's spring break. It's held outside of not Laurel, Mississippi. I just forgot.
Lumberton?
Lumberton, there you go. Thank you. And I'm glad you're picking it up, so you know where it is. But yeah, it's very south.
Hey, why do we have a panel of 3 experienced marshals in charge of wars here to talk about the year before I take on Gulf Wars?
It's about an hour and a half north of the Gulf of Mexico in Mississippi, and it is. People ask, hey, how should I dress? Should I bring my warm garb? Should I bring my summer garb? And the answer is yes, because you never know what you're going to get. One year it will be snowing, literal snow on the ground, and the next year it won't break. It won't be below 80 the entire year, or the entire week. Excuse me. One year we got a tornado. That was fun. We call that one Gulfnado, and everyone survived. So that was good news. Some parents did not.
All right. Thank you so much for that overview. I will be back with some follow-up questions for that, but I'm going to jump over to Darius next. Can you please give me an overview of Pennsic? What's the weather like? What are the people like? What are the battle and the war points like?
Yep. So Pennsic takes place every year, usually in the last week or so of July, first week or two of August in Western Pennsylvania, a hilly, mostly grassland, mountain, semi-mountain area where we get 10,000 of our closest friends and people we may or may not care about camping in a 2.2 square mile area. That includes its own lake, and you can see the truck stop from where you camp. Most times you can use that as a guiding light. But great site, great community. Weather can be erratic for that time of year. It can be in the 60s and raining. It can be colder. It can be 95 degrees and 99.9% humidity. Usually we get somewhere in the 85 to 90 degree range, and it's damp. It's Western Pennsylvania. It's humid. Fencing wise, we have 4 to 6 big war point events if you count the champions tournament in there. We have a field battle, a broken field resurrection battle of some sort. Usually there is some sort of town-ish battle or something with objectives as well as broken terrain. There is the woods battle, and then the usual big bonus battle, which isn't for points. La Rochelle seems to be a crowd favorite. It's fun to use the fort/snow fence for. War points, we usually get just shy of 300 or so to a side. 250 is a really solid number as far as realistic counts per side, and then we usually get some stuff. Some people are straggling and or don't get counted as well. So 250 to 300 people to a side, 450 to 600 people in the field of varying degrees from all over the world. It's an international event, one of the biggest in the world. Good times.
Thank you, Darius. I can't wait to look a little closer at your pragmatism and humor in dealing with that many people on the logistical scale. Last but not least, Malice, will you tell us a little bit about Atenveldt?
So Atenveldt had been held in February, and this year we're moving to November, and apparently we're going to stay permanently in November. One of the major reasons why is weather. The last 2 years we've had approximately 3 inches of rain during Atenveldt, and we don't have any dirt. So on top of clay, 3 inches of rain is 3 inches of standing water, and apparently for some reason we don't want to continue having an event at that time of year. Other years, we've hit 99 degrees in February in Arizona. So the weather can range pretty dramatically from literally freezing. Yes, Arizona does, in fact, have freezing temperatures in the valley. We've had, luckily nothing as a hurricane or a tornado as Gulf NATO had, but we had some pretty severe weather. For numbers, our numbers have been all over the map over the years. We've had war points starting in 96, as far as we can recall. And we've had numbers ranging from that year. I think we had about 50 people on the field, which was amazing because we had 50 fencers in one place at one time in the 90s. We ranged up to about 250 fighters towards the end of the aughts. We're dwindling, but building up again. After the market crashed and everything else, we got hit pretty hard. Having fencers primarily from Atenveldt, Artemisia, Caid, and the Outlands, we're pretty tied to the economy, especially when it comes to Caid. So one of our biggest concerns is always making sure that people want to come the next years. And that's kind of a logistical nightmare sometimes to make everybody happy because you can't ever make everyone happy. As to scenarios, they change every year. Unlike a lot of wars where there's a set of scenarios, we allow the war autocrat or the marshal in charge or the person who does both jobs, because they don't necessarily have to do both, to write scenarios, usually as a quorum with other kingdoms to ensure that everybody's having a good time. Typically, we have currently 11 scenarios over the course of 2 days. In past years, we've had 13 over 3 days. Was what we were shooting for in the past.
11 in
11
2 days?
2 days. 5 scenarios 1 day, 6 the other.
Well, I definitely have some follow-up questions for you. We've kind of visited this in the past in talking to some of our brethren from Lockak and some of the smaller kingdoms where a large melee is about 10 to 50 people on a really, really good event. So I can't wait to pick your brain a little bit more about how you're able to manage 11 scenarios in 2 days, because I'm also mid-realm, and hearing Darius talk about Pennsic might trigger a little bit of my PTSD. And watching Wistric cringe as he hears Binn talk about the Gulf Wars makes me happy on the inside. All right, so my next question, I'm going to open this up to the floor. We've talked a little bit about the different weather considerations. We've talked about the variety of scenarios. We've talked about the number of people. And as we all know, hell is other people, and the higher your numbers go, the lower the IQ gets collectively. So I want to talk about how do we choose marshals at these wars? Especially because it sounds like we have a range of functions for our marshals, whether it's keeping the collective IQ at a bar or it's running 11 events or 11 war points and scenarios. So how are marshals chosen, or are they chosen? Is it purely volunteer based? And I'm not going to go through the list on this. I'd like to hear all of you speak, but whoever's ready to go and whenever.
Well, for us, we try volunteers first. If we get enough volunteers to cover the number of fencers, kind of our core number is 1 marshal for every 20 fencers that we have on the field. As long as we hit those numbers, we're in good shape. If we don't hit those numbers, we press the commanders to get people to volunteer, because we find that's easier than asking the people ourselves. That way they can kind of, at their best leisure, go, well, I don't really want to lose my best fighters. Hey, could you do us a favor and marshal this scenario? A lot of on the West Coast, anybody who fights and is over the age of 18 is expected to be able to marshal, maybe not sign cards as a warranted and authorizing marshal, but just about everybody's expected to be able to do the basic job.
Yeah, that's a similar thing for Gulf Wars, depending on the scenario. So absolutely, we're blessed with regulars that from all over the different kingdoms and everything that come in every year. You see the same people every year, and there's this sort of core group that you get to know that you can count on. That hey, I'm doing a field battle. I know I've got at least 5, 6 solid marshals out there. The rest is filled up with volunteers. we'll go through either, like you said, anyone that is a fencer is expected to be able to field marshal. I think in Ansteorra there's a special designation for it. They're like, hey, you've been fencing, you're a field marshal, here, hold this stick. It's more strict than that. I don't mean to give it be flippant about it, but yeah. So depending on the scenario in the field battle, it is one marshal for every 15 people now. It used to be one for every 10 people on the field. I think we got that changed. I could be wrong about that. Wistric's probably read the rule book more recently than I have. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I can't remember what it was for last year. Yeah. I remember one for 10 though.
Yeah, we've been fighting that because that's just too many marshals. At some point, I mean, you want to be safe, you want to have maximum safety, but at some point you've got almost as many marshals on the field and they're just in the way and cause more hazards. Ravine battle is about as strict. We have marshals just on the edge of the field for the boundary in both the field and the ravine, and they just basically keep people inside the bounds. And on the hazards. So is everyone familiar with the ravine battle? It's literally a ravine. So I mean, it's about.
Go ahead and don't assume.
Don't assume. Please give us a description.
Yeah. So it's I would say 3/4 of a football field long and about half as wide. There are three. It is good 15 degree slopes towards the middle, and then wide like a big ravine right down the middle. It's filled with trees and stumps and slippery grass and dirt spots and limbs. We try to get all the limbs out beforehand. That leaves sometimes. The scenario is there are 3 posts. It's basically capture the flag. So you capture the flag at each point. It's a resurrection battle. It's a timed battle. So we try to keep it to 45 minutes if everyone's feeling safe. We've gone to an hour before, but we found that sweet spot is about 45 minutes where everyone starts getting tired and grumpy and sloppy. So that's a big marshaling concern is making sure that, all your marshals are still on their toes and all the fighters are not getting tired and sloppy. So, yeah.
No, and thank you. You've given us a great overview of some of the things that we want to delve into a little bit deeper later. Wistric and I were actually laughing because we were literally in our questions outline. We were just like, how do you figure out marshal ratio? And you mentioned it right after we typed it. So I want to thank you for that. And then I want to jump over to Darius. Logistical issues. How do you choose your marshals at these wars? I know Pennsic is a little bit weird.
Pennsic is a beast all its own. Only Pennsic is worth the inconvenience of Pennsic. So when we have 200 to 300 people to a side from all over the place in scenarios that were mostly at least approved and final decision made by the royals of the mid, the east, and their allies in discussion, depending on what level they're talking. We've done a couple of different things over the years. The most recent times, we've tried to get volunteers ahead of time. And depending on what the scenarios are, we'll have people that, hey, I don't like field battles. I'll come to a field battle. I'm allergic to poison ivy. I won't be anywhere near the woods. But I'll help watch people at the res points or something like that. So we tend to have, because of the way Pennsic is set up, there tends to be a marshal's tent and a more localized station that is always manned, and that's generally done by volunteers. We try to get people from at least the primary kingdoms, being the mid and the east, but we will take whoever of reasonable responsibility to volunteer to watch over the field. In the scenarios, we tend to have folks along the boundaries, and more particularly the edge lines are used as res points, and then at particular doorways or hazards or whatever you want to call particular hot points. And then we will tend to have some folks roaming around as coverage to see who needs what. In Pennsic, since the field is, 500 by 600, and we have nearly a fighter per square foot, or not square foot, but per foot of length. It gets hairy real quick, and there are generally 6 to 10 radios on the field. We also have some additional overwatch and medical call folks if we need it. So we try to operate with volunteers, and some folks like this are there every year for every different scenario. If we have to, we will go and try to pull people that day if needed. We try to get somewhere in the 1 to 20-ish ratio range. Depends on how squirrely people are being and how good or bad the weather is. And a lot of that is kind of seen leading up to the first war points in how people are behaving around the marshal's tent, how they're behaving at La Rochelle. You can get a feel for how the crowd is going. So you can do that kind of stuff. But very rarely do we do anything with less than 15 to 20 marshals, probably at a minimum. We might have run something as narrow as 12.
So you said, you sometimes have to fill in day of with additional volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And you also said it changes year to year, but like, what's the sort of average out of those 15 marshals, 20 marshals that you're going to have?
Usually we have most people volunteered ahead of time.
Okay.
We'll put out, at least the last couple of years, we have put out like Sign Up Genius style things, or a Google form where you could sign up for a time. That includes either being at the marshal's tent and just marshaling general activities and keeping an eye on things, or to volunteer for a time slot that was during one of the war points. So you could end up watching over one of our subfields. It's a 10 by 10 or a 20 by 20 space that might have 8 or 10 people doing pickups. If that's what you volunteer for, you could be watching over the Atlantean 5-man tournament, which is something we try to get some of our more experienced marshals to watch after. Atlantia usually brings their own marshals for that. So depending on what the sub item is, whoever's sponsoring the particular activity may have their own marshal corps that they bring with them and may or may not need staff marshals. Then the war points, we definitely we try to get people signed up ahead of time. Very rarely do we have to pull more than 1 or 2 day of. And usually it's, we have people show up and be like, hey, I'm not really feeling this one. I hurt my arm yesterday. I don't really want to push it because I want to fight tomorrow. Or, hey, I've even had people be super honest with me. They showed up and they're like, I probably shouldn't be on the field today. Can I just stand here at the back row and just lean on a stick and watch people just to make sure that they're being safe when they're coming to the res line, which is generally, another 10 or 15 feet easily from any real combat battle that's going on. So when I don't know how often we ever see a field that big where we have 500 feet to a side. Not all of that is combat space. It all ends up devolving into a line battle at some point, where you end up with some combat swirls. The field battle is the most chaotic, but even the woods breaks down into a line battle. So you can station people in different places where people are like, hey, I can move, but I can't really run. Is there someone I can like kind of post up? Like, yeah, sure. Here, you can be at this res point and just watch over this res point or this flag, or 10 feet off of this flag, just so you're not in the mix of things, but you can see what's going on. So we'll work with whoever we have. There's always times we could probably use 2-3 more marshals. With that many people in the field, it's hard to get a real feel. You can tell when you're understaffed It's hard to, I don't know that we've ever been overstaffed at Pennsic, except for maybe the champs team. People volunteer for that to try to get some of the better seats in the house. We're seeing some of the high-end fights there.
I'd like to follow up on that in some subsequent questions, especially when we start talking about determining how we know when a war is going to be kind of spicy or when it's just normal run-of-the-mill. And when we talk a little bit more about what do we do well and what do we do poorly as marshals. So hang tight, Darius. I will be back. I know that Binn had a follow-up he wanted to pipe in with.
Yeah, so I was going to talk about the volunteer points at Gulf Wars. I don't know if Pennsic or the others, Estrella has like a similar system for volunteers. But basically when you, before the war, you can do it online, or you can do it at the war. There's a volunteer tent. You go in there and you sign up. It gives your name and what kingdom, what local group you're from, where you want your points to go. And every time you get, so you volunteer at any point, at anything in the war, like, hey, I'm going to marshal for the day, or I marshaled, the field battle for 2 hours, or I marshaled this for an hour. The marshal in charge for that day, which gets me on another tangent, but the marshal in charge for that day will actually fill out your a timesheet. Basically, everyone signs a timesheet, or they give out little chits to everybody, and you take that and drop it off at the volunteer tent, and your kingdom, local group, whatever group you designated, actually gets those points, and there's like a profit sharing thing from the proceeds of the war. Your local group actually gets money for how much you volunteer. So that's a big incentive for rounding up marshals as well. So
very cool. So we have the perpetually understaffed problem and one solution to that problem, which is basically volunteer points. I know Pennsic had been kind of looking into implementing something like that, but the scale was always a little bit insane. But it's great actually hearing that. And I definitely have some follow-ups on both the volunteer point and to Darius's point with getting enough marshals on the field. When we talk a little bit about avoiding biases and the referee problem, especially with a larger war like Pennsic, and even Gulf Wars, where it can get a little bit competitive between the kingdoms. So I will be back to both of you. And since you both have kind of given a golden number, a golden ratio for the amount of fighters to marshals, I wanted to follow up with Malice and see what the rule of thumb from from Astenea was.
So currently we're running on about 1 to 20, one marshal for every 20 fighters. And we really don't have a problem hitting that number most of the time. Much like Gulf Wars does, we incentivize volunteerism. We do it through profit sharing, but we also have a volunteer raffle. And part of merchants at Astenea is they have to give up something for the auction, and I shouldn't say auction, but for the raffle. So that way we just incentivize them by giving money to their local group, and we can have it go to a barony, go to a kingdom, whatever else it is. We do things a little differently than the timesheets that you have. We actually keep a book. So every person has their own page in the book. Everything gets filled out on their page. At the end of the war, that marshal in charge just hands it off to the volunteer autocrat and says, here's my stuff. We were able to give out the tickets to the raffle the time of. That way they can get things and put them in for whatever prizes it is that they're looking for. If we have a time where we know things are, as you said, getting spicy, because they have in the past, definitely, we usually know it at the end of the first day when we used to have 3 days of combat. We'd be able to quickly tell, okay, all right, this group of people or that group of people are here and they want to have their version of a good time versus perhaps most other people's version of a good time. One of the great things is being able to call that person out. And since everyone over the age of 18 is expected to be able to marshal, go ask them to marshal. I'm sorry, you're going to have to sit out this next scenario. And we're going to ask you to marshal. It's amazing how quickly their attitude changes when we go from you're the problem to now you have to watch the problem devolve in front of you.
That's actually pretty excellent. I love hearing all these bribery stories, especially from dealing with the background of Penzek for so many years now. Sorry, Darius. All right. So
I volunteered for this job, so yeah.
you are a sick, sick puppy.
Yeah.
That's not rude to anyone.
I'm sorry.
Love it or be a masochist, I guess.
Both is good. All right. So now that we have a little bit of an overview of each of the wars that you guys have basically been in charge of getting marshals on the field and making sure that things run smoothly, I'd like to take a step back and look at the more general question with, like, what is a marshal's function? Just an overview. What is the marshal's job? And I'm going to open this to everyone on the floor because I'm really hoping that the answers will all be kind of similar. If they're not, well, discussion. And if they are, well, fabulous. So what is a marshal's job?
In my mind, the marshal's first primary job is to ensure safety for everyone on the field. And second to that is making sure everyone has fun and playing by the rules. And then, of course, third is the paperwork and organization and making sure all the bureaucracy of that we do in the society gets taken care of. But absolutely, to me, the first rule is making sure everyone's safe.
Okay. Anyone have anything to add to that?
I do. I think it's also a question of what are you talking about as a marshal? Are you talking about the marshal in charge? Are you talking about the rapier autocrat? Or are you talking about a person who's just marshaling the field? Because all three of them have pretty vastly different jobs over the course of Astraea's in the past. So for the marshal,
autocrat?
Sorry, what was that?
Did you say rapier autocrat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we've done things differently in the past. So
I know, like,
let's define what that is. So over the course of time, we have basically 3 different jobs that people can wind up doing on the way to having a successful Astraea. One of them is part of the scenario design quorum. And these people help the rapier autocrat, the person who actually gets everything organized and done, make sure that everything's done before war actually happens. Sometimes the autocrat is also the marshal in charge, but that has not always been the case. Some Kingdom Rapier marshals have said, you know what, I really want to be in charge, but I want this person to be able to do all the back work, giving the opportunity for somebody else to showcase themselves, but still go out on the field and be that effective fighter. So we've handled it a bunch of different ways. So to kind of answer that question in threefold, with the marshal on the field, their job is really safety. Number one thing is safety and making sure that the rules are applied evenly across all groups of people. Sometimes we see that, you know, if we put a marshal from side A in the middle of side B's fighter, they might be especially stringent on a particular rule, like what the definition of running is, which we have to define at the beginning of just about every day, or at sometimes at the beginning of every scenario at Astraea. Same thing too with death from behind. Sometimes we have to define it at the beginning of every scenario because we had at least one, if not multiple infractions of people doing it incorrectly during the scenario. So it's their job to look out for those sort of things. And again, you're absolutely right about fun. It's really important that people have fun because we want people to tell their friends and come back next year. As to the rapier marshal in charge, their job is to be an administrator more than anything else. While oftentimes they wound up marshaling on the field as well, we've had times where they didn't, where they said, you know what, I'm going to be at Marshal's Point. I'm going to do all of these things. I'm also going to ensure that no fighters enter the field once the field is sealed. And that allows them to do kind of some paperwork in advance to get ready for what's going to happen next. Because again, like you said, having 6 scenarios in one day, there are definitely some logistical questions involved with that. The rapier autocrat's job, like I said, we've had be the marshal in charge and not be the marshal in charge, is kind of the biggest job because it all happens before war, unless a question comes up during war that they are really specifically responsible for. And sometimes that comes from points higher, comes from the autocrats of the war, or perhaps royals, on any side.
Okay.
What do you mean by sealing the field?
What is this?
So once a scenario starts, we do not allow any additional fighters to enter the field. They can be checked. They can go through inspection because unlike having just one war point a day where everybody shows up, are we all here? Okay, let's go. We have some people who come in a little bit later in the day. Sometimes it's because, you know what, I don't really care for that first scenario that they're running, so I'm not going to show up until the second or third one. Sometimes it's just because that's when they arrived on site. We're able to come to the field at that point.
Okay, that is definitely some new terminology for something that I've internalized myself, but other people may not have. So thank you for sharing that.
Do you guys have a different term that you use?
There's no term.
Yeah,
So we heard the term.
like you get people running up from camp after the cannon goes off for a battle.
And that's
at Pinzik, and Gold Force doesn't have a cannon, but because I've been that person at both. But yeah, like that's not a concept that I've even thought of having in place at a war.
Nope.
So that's
at Pinzik it would be nearly logistically impossible.
but that's
Our field
The
make it
cool idea, and then we just have to figure out a way.
So we talked about logistics, and just to kind of let you know one quick thing too. Where Gulf Wars, you have a site, and Pinzik, you have a site. Atenveldt, over the 12 years that I did work on it, we had 4 different sites, and we've had 2 since then. So sometimes we're running blind into what we're actually going to wind up with the 3 days before scenarios start when we start setting up the field.
Understood. Darius, is there anything you'd like to add for the overview of the marshal's job? And I think we're going to delve a little deeper here on some of the hierarchy of marshals, since Malice so gracefully pointed out that there are 5 or 6 different jobs for marshals, specifically at Atenveldt alone. So I kind of wanted to touch on both Pinzik and Gulf Wars a little bit once we're done with our overview of what a marshal's job is.
Sure. From a Pinzik side point, there's need and use for all levels of marshal. From the top down, there is the Earl Marshals, which are usually over the Kingdom Rapier Marshals, which in, at least at the last Pinzik, there was also an actual official Marshal's Court that was lined out in the rulebook. That actually worked really well, and we're planning to do it again for when Pinzik happens next. So there's the on-the-field marshal is there mostly primarily for observation of safety, advisement on safety of, hey, watch your footing, hey, don't do that, that doesn't look as safe as it could be, here's your warning, and to observe and report to the next level marshal up. Most times that would be going from whoever the marshal on the field is to either the marshals working the tent or one of the kingdom level appointees are usually there and can get a hold of the KRMs or the Rapier one at any given point in time. So it's a lot of observe and report and try to just maintain general safety. And if people get heated, call for a different level of marshal if you can't handle it yourself. Never be afraid to kick something up to have somebody else take a look at it. There's a whole lot of mentality in there that I can talk to that I'm not sure that's going to be best in this point in time, but observe and report is what it comes down to. Because if we don't have people that have seen what's happened, then when there are issues, even if they're minor, it's always going to be a he said, she said, whoever said versus the other person. And if there's no observer of what actually happened, or some way to try to work towards what somebody is upset about or finding out what somebody's upset about and resolving it, there's not a whole lot we can do. And especially when you have, 200-300 people to a side, it's really easy for people to do something that maybe they shouldn't have and then disappear into the crowd.
Okay. No. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries. Thank you for that overview, Darius. I have a couple of follow-ups, but I believe that Malice wanted to jump in with observing and reporting, and actually probably you too, Binn, based on the private chat we have going. So I'll let you both go. Malice, you first.
All right. So one of the things that I instituted probably in '02 or so was we give every single person who is actively marshaling on the field a notepad. If something happens that the fighters are getting hot at each other, or somebody's yelling about something, or goodness forbid a mask flies off, which we've seen unfortunately far too many times out on the field, the marshal's first job is to get those two people's names and write them down. That way we have the ability to say, all right, so-and-so got into 3 altercations with people on the field over the course of our scenarios yesterday. Let's have a talk with them at the beginning of the day. That makes things with, you guys have an official marshal's court. We pretty much have meetings unless we really have the need to have a marshal's court, which is probably logistically very different in Atenveldt than it is at Pensick. So yeah, that's an easy thing for us to do. One of the great things is, for a lot of people, the instant they say, okay, great, you whip out the notepad, you take the pen, what's your name? It's not that big a deal. They walk away. Mm-hmm. So in some ways that's good because it de-escalates the situation pretty quickly. In some ways it's bad because we don't necessarily see who it is who's getting involved in those situations.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, he's over here. I don't know, on my screen. That's what we did at Gulf Wars. I guess it's been about 5 years now. Ethan, one of the Glenavon's blademen, came up. He basically created a little ticket book and made massive copies. And so everyone marshaling that day on the field, we made tons of these little things. There may be some in the Marshal box still. But it's basically who was involved. It's basically just a little notebook. It just has pre-filled out form or fields like who's involved, the names, what happened, who was the marshal, just what event was it or what scenario. So, and that, like you said, it really, first of all, it helps because I hate those meetings where, you have a marshal meeting in the morning. Hey, here's what's going on today. Here's what happened yesterday. And it's always, well, somebody was being a problem. Well, who? Well, I don't know. They just said somebody. They didn't remember who it was, or they had a black mask, just things like that. So yeah, the notebook has really helped. And like you said, it often de-escalates things because as soon as you start writing down names, people are like, okay, maybe it isn't such a big deal after all. Yeah.
So talking a little bit about tickets and notebooks and various functions of the marshal, I heard a couple of phrases bandied about, and pretend that I have never seen a rapier field, because to some people I have not. What does it mean for marshals working the tent? And when you guys are talking about paperwork, I'm going to just open this up to the floor, try to keep your answers pretty succinct. But what type of paperwork is there that our marshals are doing at these big wars that the normal Joe Schmo fencer bro may not know about? So I'm gonna open that up. So first, what does it mean for marshals to work the tent? And second, what does the paperwork look like?
I can comment about the Gulf Wars paperwork. Basically, every scenario, whether it's just a little tournament or people running one of the larger tournaments like the Rose Tournament or one of the war points, there's basically a sign-in sheet where every fencer signs in for that. So you get the numbers of fencers, the scenarios, how long it took, what day, what time, etc. And then, so basically at the end of the war, the marshal in charge takes all that paperwork and makes a report for the autocrats. And it's just to help, at its bare essence, help to track numbers. How much are we growing? Are we shrinking? How much has it changed? Did people really hate this scenario and just didn't sign up? Do we need more field on this scenario because people keep showing up? Things like that. The worst part of the job, though, is the injury reports. You don't want to have those. A war without an injury report is a good war, as far as I'm concerned. But those are the tough ones, and God forbid that anyone is seriously injured and has to leave the war on an ambulance, which has happened. I've seen it happen. I've seen people walk away with broken ribs. It's not fun part of the job, but that's one of the important things that marshals have to do, especially the tent marshals further up. Going to camps and tracking down people who were injured or filed a report, things like that. There's a rule in Gulf Wars. It's just basically a rule of thumb. If you injure somebody, you are out of the war for as long as they are out of the war. So if you hit somebody's hand, even if it's by accident and both sides are agreeable, if they have to sit out the rest of that battle or that event, so does the person who injured them. And if you take somebody out for the rest of the war, you're out for the rest of the war. So it's just kind of a, incentive not to hurt anybody. Accidents happen. That's why we have marshals. So, but.
All right, I'm going to open this up to the other two.
All right, so at Atenveldt, we've had a lot of incidents over the course of the years. The number one incident we have is twisted ankles. We have not just open fields, which are kind of grassy. If anyone's actually been to Phoenix, you understand that grass doesn't necessarily mean that green stuff that's on the ground. Sometimes it's brown and in clumps that you trip over. We also have a lot of broken fields that we've had over the course of time too. So injury reports, yeah, those are the worst things. And to pick up on what you said, having somebody taken off site in an ambulance is bad. Having somebody medevaced off is even worse, which we've had at Wistric. But that incident was 99% that fighter's fault. And well, I shouldn't say that. 50% that fighter's fault, 50% whoever inspected them fault. This was many, many years ago. We had just instituted rigid gorge.
Uh-oh.
And I'm talking about.
No.
Oh, no.
What's that?
You went full robot on us.
I think you might be back.
Yeah.
I think I'm back. All right. What did we last hear?
Rigid gorge.
All right. So we had just gone to rigid gorges as a society, not just Atenveldt, and a fencer was on the field wearing a 4-ounce suede gorget backed with about a ½ inch of open cell foam. He got hit in the throat. Obviously, this is not a good situation. He didn't get pierced because the mask did entirely its job, but he was in a very bad state, laying on the ground aspirating as we had the ambulance show up. They determined that wasn't fast enough, so they called in a medevac chopper, and he was taken off. So while we have at times talked about taking off a person for as long as that other person is out, there are kind of underlying circumstances for everything. So as to working the tent, the rest of the information for us is we've kind of made a lot of accountability over the course of the years. If we go back into the 90s, well, I'll be honest, there was almost none. Hey, Marshal, you're okay to inspect people's blades. Here are some stickers. Here's some stickers to inspect people's armors. Go at it. Today, we have every marshal put their initials on anything that they're inspecting, so that if something comes back and something happened, we can also go to that marshal and say, hey, your initials are on this fighter's helmet, which means that you inspect them and they're neither wearing a cup nor a gorget. Yes, that happened. Why don't you tell me about that? And because those things happen and then it gets out kind of purposefully, the rest of the fighters know, in fact, we know everything that it is that's going on because, well, a lot of people think that there's no quote unquote getting caught. It's not so much getting caught. It's the person who didn't do their job who's going to suffer more than even you who did the job the wrong way. When it comes to work in the tent, that's usually the MIC. They're the one there making sure that we're getting people's initials to what they look like. Okay, Malice's initials look like this, so anytime he inspects a blade or inspects a fighter's armor, this is what we expect to see on that sticker. And then, yes, paperwork at the end is a big thing. The hope is always to have no paperwork whatsoever when it comes to injuries, and just a paperwork that says this many fighters showed up because we have this many people who signed in this day.
Mhm.
So really, there's a lot of paperwork involved, but the nice thing is most of it's done after war, hopefully. And when it's done at war, usually it's a lot less frequent than unfortunately we dread happening as an MIC.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. That is very insightful. And I'm going to jump over to Darius, last but not least. What does it mean to work the tent as a marshal at Pennsic?
So Pennsic does things a little bit differently, wherein that you have to be officially inspected once before you take part in activities. Some years that's declared to only count towards war points. In general, you get inspected once by official folks working the marshal's tent. So towards the beginning of the week, big push, get everybody in inspected so you know that they've at least been seen and looked at once. And then everybody else is supposed to, after that first inspection, if you change your armor, if you go leave the field and take a bunch of stuff off, you put your kit back on, you get yourself re-inspected. You inspect your own weapons if you're able, you grab whatever marshal's available. Since most points and activities are staffed, you can usually find someone officially acting as a marshal, or you can get your buddy who's also gearing up to check on you, because there's no real good logistical way to look on 300 to 500 fencers a day from an official standpoint. You have to put some of the onus of bad behavior or good behavior on the folks that are participating. If you want to participate, you have to follow the rules and behave yourselves. And that's a large part of the Pennsic paperwork too. We don't always know. We have record of who the marshals in charge of an event were supposed to be. We don't always get numbers or reports for what happened unless something bad happened. Somebody had a calibration issue. We want somebody to get a warning for a calibration issue, or so we had weapons failures, we had tip failures, we had armor that was not up to par. Those kind of things get reported. Luckily for how many passes occur at Pennsic and how many different environments and people are playing, we don't get too many injuries. I want to say last Pennsic, there was a list of less than 25 officially reported injuries. Now, we know more things happened than that. That's why I'm saying officially reported. And those weren't even necessarily something I was in charge of, but I did do some of the paperwork. There's an injuries form that we keep in the tent, or I guess just observations form. Last Pennsic, things were changed about how we could warn or officially sanction people, and that went up to the marshal's court, which was partly taken out of the Kingdom Rapier Marshal's hands, as to we could highly suggest what the punishment should be for a thing, but there was a listed tribunal of mostly non-primary kingdom dukes that were appointed to try to have a more fair, less bias role in applying punishments or anything like that. Pennsic is surprisingly clean for the most part. And with the number of people just trying to look out for their friends and look out for other people, most people there are trying to do the right thing and trying to make sure everybody is safe to fight again tomorrow, later, the next day. So you're just as likely, if not more likely, to see somebody say, hey, you know, your gorget is unbuckled, or even your shoes untied, literally. Or, hey, you dropped your weapon, let's all like step back a minute, pause, let you grab your hey, don't trip over that hay bale, it's behind you. You're likely to see people be nice as often as you're going. Far more often you're going to see somebody be a jerk, which makes the times that people are jerks stand out that much more, because it's that much glaring of a thing.
No, that's a great overview of why you have such a variety of marshals between tent, field, RMIC, etc. So I want to segue into our next portion. Actually, first, I want to ask what a marshal's court is. One sentence answers. What is marshal's court at each event? Let's start with Estrella.
Don't really have a marshal's court. We have a quick meeting and hope that everything went well.
Perfect.
What happens if it didn't?
Usually if it didn't, we've probably pulled the fighter off the field already. We have the information, so it really doesn't need to be anything that's addressed other than with the marshals. Hey, if you're coming back, Joe Stickjock, he did this. Make sure that he doesn't do it tomorrow.
Perfect.
Unless it's more severe and Joe Stickjock is no longer valid to fight as a fighter at this war. And that sometimes has even included tournaments, which are a completely separate animal from the melees that we have.
I think that's an excellent overview. I'm going to jump to Gulf Wars next.
It's going to be a run-on sentence.
Go for it. I believe in you.
So a marshal court at Gulf Wars is if something has happened and there's some conflict or disagreement about the results or the event that happened. And so what it is it's several whoever's represent or whoever the not guilty party, the accused party. So if it's unclear what happened and everyone wants to get to the bottom of it because it's serious, the accused person or the offender, their kingdom represents them. The slighted person or group, their kingdom represents them. Everyone gets into a little tent. There's the marshal in charge, their deputy, as well as oftentimes the war marshal, as well as the crown of Glenavon. Crown of Glenavon settles. That's the end of the line. So basically, it's there to find out what happened and what resolution there's going to be, and if nothing happened, then go home or go back to play. And if something happened, decide what to do about it, up to and including, expelling the person from the rest of the battles, the war, etc. That was a really long run-on sentence.
You know what? It was a great overview of what happened. All right, Darius, what is
that's actually pretty similar to how things hopefully work at Penzic. It's a lot of the witness observation, discussion, and resolving it at its lowest level as possible, but there are escalation points that could impact that fighter's career beyond that hour that it happened. The better choices you make, the more apologetic you are, can have a much happier outcome for you.
You mentioned earlier on that something had changed at Penzic last year with how you were doing Marshal's Courts. Can you give us a Cliff Notes version?
Sure. It was more, from what I understand, it's more of an issue. Scratch that. There was a opportunity to make some things less biased, and to have a higher level group of folks generalize an issue, take in the observations, and then decide what should happen. So I think the 2 or 3 that we had for Rapier were resolved pretty quickly. Each person got to say what they thought happened. Witnesses, if they were there, were able to speak. While I and Ilias as Rapier 1 were there, as well as Uller, who was Kingdom Royal Marshal, was there. And then the actual folks sitting, the 3-person panel that was represented to was a Duke from Atlantia, I think Penzic overall Marshal. There was 3 high-ranking folks there that got a chance to look at things and say, is this really something that we need to have somebody stop fighting for or not? You did something dumb, go apologize. Are you both mostly happy with an apology, or do you need a more severe sanctioning. And mostly everybody was like, hey, look, we were both hot. We apologized. Thank you for hearing us out. Hearing the perspectives, we pretty much agree on that and move on. But it's the opportunity for, if we needed to go to somebody's KRM afterwards, or even their crown, if need be, or marshal, and say, hey, this person did something they really shouldn't have. This is your opportunity. We're telling you that they're no longer going to be a combatant here. And we're advising you as their high-level official of that. And it would be our recommendation that if they were one of our people, they would no longer be authorized to fight for the next 90 days. Now, luckily, we don't very rarely come to that.
Mm-hmm.
We always want to keep people on the field. The goal is for people to be out there doing the thing that they love, not to have people ride the bench or go home. But that depends on you behaving properly.
So it sounds like you had a little bit more structure, which is something that Pennsic really
excels at.
And that part of it was kind of new, where before it kind of fell to Rapier 1 and or Rapier 2 to kind of have their discussion and be like, hey, that's cool. You messed up. You're done for the day, or you're done for war.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, we've had to deal with it very few times, or the times that we would have liked to have done something about it because we didn't have good witnesses, good observations, or even the ability to pick the person out of the crowd. We couldn't do anything about it.
Well, and this is why I have folders and folders of maps and charts for who's in charge at Pennsic.
It's a logistical beast all its own.
Mm-hmm. All right. So my final question for this kind of section that we have here about what does it mean to be a marshal, I have a challenge for my three panelists. One word answer. If you could sum up what it's like to be basically marshal in charge, what's the one word you would use to describe it for your respective wars? I'm going to start with Binn.
Take your time.
One word, huh?
That's three. I apologize for putting you on the spot. If you can,
I apologize for not having a good, because at the end of the day, you're facilitating people's fun. So that's the most important part to me, is that one word right there.
Perfect. Malice, you're next.
All right, we're going with the hyphenated world of controlled chaotic fun.
Controlled chaos. Perfect. Right on point, right on brand for fighting the world. Darius, if you could describe being marshal in charge for Pennsic in one word.
Service.
Service.
You can provide good service, you can provide bad service, but in the end, the service is always there, or should be.
And that is a perfect segue to my next set of questions, which have to do with the logistical considerations for melee with regards to keeping the fighters safe, involving the events themselves, the rules, the culture, the weather. So I want to go back a little bit to what we discussed early on in giving the overview of each war. And each one of you mentioned the word hazards, hot points, squirrely people. How, and I want to keep this kind of short because this is just to kind of set up the spike for the rest of this section. But how do we determine, or how is it decided? How can you tell that first event after that first battle that it's going to be a spicy war? And what are some of the things you can do to mitigate that? I'm going to start with Darius. Just try to keep it succinct, because I'm going somewhere with this.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. If you need to prompt me, please step in, say something, because this is something I could talk about for far longer than this block of time is allotted, honestly. So a lot of times we can use the non-war point La Rochelle battle, which is the battle around the fort, which is usually unlimited res for attackers and 3 to 5 lives for the folks that are defending. Because of terrain and just usually people do that one as fun, you can start getting to see how people are feeling, how the terrain is holding up, because there's always mud, there's always gravel, there's always some interesting things that just happen with how the grass is cut or not, where the hay bales are, if people are actually like getting inspected and like, or if they're just roaming around and thinking they're going to go fight, you know, how much you have to rein in the general logistics of people and how their general behavior is. And that also allows for some hot spots for kill pockets and calibration issues, especially for how some of the terrain is angled towards the doors, which can also help cause some calibration issues, as well as the gravel or people just trying to charge in, because part of that scenario is the your lives mean nothing, die on a sword, try to take somebody out with you, double kill scenario of breaking into an embattled position. And how people behave in that, and how well they keep their cool and calm during those half hour or so of battles, can tell you how the week is going to go. And then you can also add into that what the weather's supposed to be like. If it's going to be if it's going to be in the 80s and relatively like cloudy, or if it's going to be 95 and 100% humidity, then we have to start looking at, is heat going to be a hazard? Are people going to be a hazard to themselves by not hydrating? And all of those type of things too.
So I have a quick follow-up with that as someone who has gone to Pennsic for a few years now. Would you say that there's any social effect on how people react at Pennsic based on kingdom pride or someone's anniversary year, or who's in charge at the time, like which general or which royalty? Does that ever affect how hot-headed people are or the behavior in your experience?
In the more recent years, I would say that it's a little more balanced, and as a whole, the rapier community is, no matter who's in charge, while there might be a little bit more fervor against your high school rivals, there's always going to be some of that. But I think, especially after some of the Purple Wars and just some of the community being more of a global community, that people are a little more understanding of, that's people on the other end of the sword that I'm fighting. While I want to kill them, I don't want to hurt them. So I think when we did some of the Mid and East versus the world, and we've done some of the things like La Rochelle, where you can just kind of join up with a group and go fight, some of those things have helped bridge some of those prior social issues. And I don't even think they were intentional social issues. I just think it was, we didn't really talk about it. So the other kingdom was always the bad people.
I think that's a great overview, and that leads me kind of where I want to go next. But I want to let Malice and Binn give me a quick overview on how do you know that war is going to be hot?
So I think that hot is one of the things that we actually have to deal with, and I do mean temperature-wise, looking at the weather. Luckily, that's something we know in advance. You know, we
I'm in Georgia, and the war's in February, and you're saying hot, and it's just
Pennsic summer weather is what we have in February. So what? That's why we don't have wars in August, because when it's 121 degrees outside, no one's fighting outside.
But it's a dry heat.
Yeah, a dry heat is also taking a blow dryer, pointing it at your face, and throwing sand in the air to hit you. So the weather is definitely a concern. Luckily, we know what that is in advance, and at least the day before, hopefully we have a pretty good idea as to what forecast looks like. But one of the big things for me is a combination of two things, actually. One of them is volume on the field. So there's loud years, and then there's quiet years, and you kind of can tell what it is that's going on the field as to whether it's a good quiet where people are having a good time and just there's nothing bad going on, or sometimes it's a bad quiet where people are trying to be crafty, try to figure out how to get everything done around the rule set, try to look at the rules and manipulate them as best we can. So if we have, a loud year with moderate temperatures and it's loud because there's laughter all over the field, I know things are probably going to be good for the rest of the war. If it's a little bit rainy day and people are kind of flaring up in anger after that first scenario, yep, we also know how probably the rest of the war is going to go too. Now, with the weather as variable as it can be, that could change tomorrow, that we could go from rainy today to 80 degrees and wonderful the next. So sometimes it will change in the middle of the war.
Yeah.
I have to agree with Wistric on this one. I think we're both in this story as the rules lawyer. Sorry.
I'm going, can I still get away with breaking that rule? Yeah. Okay, good. Or can I still get away with that loophole in the rules?
Yeah.
It's not breaking it, it's the loophole. But we've talked about that in other episodes. All right, Binn, finally, how do you know when a war is going to be hot, and how do you identify those hazards early on?
So it's kind of like going to a concert. You feel the energy of the crowd, and you can tell. Malice was just saying it. You can tell kind of like if it's a good quiet or a bad quiet. Another thing that we do is talk to the war commanders, the kingdoms, each individual kingdom's war commanders, talk to the other marshals, go camp to camp at night and just see how people are feeling. If people are like bad mouthing, those guys over there and, blah, 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 grumble, you can kind of tell. We also have different scenarios that are watched more closely than others. Specifically, I know I keep bringing it up, and that's a tired horse to kick. But the ravine battle, it gets nasty. It can get nasty, and it has in the past. And that's the one where we try to watch and keep it as cool as possible. We even a little over marshal sometimes just to keep it down. We'll do breaks. If it's getting real hot. We're just like, okay, everyone take a knee. We're going to take 5. Get a drink of water. The water people are coming through. We've had to do that before. That's a good recommendation. So, but yeah, just the general feel of the crowd. When you got 400 fencers on the field, you can feel it. Talking to the generals, talking to the marshals, seeing what they've overheard, and then of course your trigger scenarios that you're going to have problems with. So.
Perfect. I think that's a really good overview of how we identify when there are going to be problems. So that kind of leads me into my next question. And I know I'm going to say this again, and everyone's going to ask for run-on sentences, but I'd like to talk briefly about the things we do well, like really well. What is our marshal good at? I know there's service, there's volunteerism, there's keeping people safe. And what are some of the things we do poorly? I'm going to go through each panelist, and I'm going to ask for 3 things we do well and 3 things we do poorly. Before diving into some of the misconceptions and things that we can improve in training our marshalate. That's kind of where I'm hoping to go with this. So first, I'm going to ask Binn, what are some of the 3 things that marshalate does well and 3 things that we could improve upon?
The 3 things that the marshalate does well. First of all, making sure everyone stays safe. Rules are not written for the people who follow rules, and marshals are there to make sure that everyone is playing by the rules and safely. And that's pretty well, facilitating fun, making sure people are hyped up and having fun and not being just ground and ruled lawyered to death. That's always fun or always good. And volunteering. Our marshalate, that I've never run out of volunteers. I've never had to just force people to volunteer. What we do poorly, I would say records are poor. We could keep better records so that if somebody becomes a problem, there's documentation in a paper trail so that, oh, this person has been a problem 3-4 times. Let's definitely deal with that rather than, oh, I told him not to do this. Well, I told him too. Whoa, me too. We're not communicating. So communication is another thing that we could do better. A third thing.
If you don't have 3 things, that is 5.
Reporting and writing down things and communication between the marshals. Those could improve. Even with daily meetings, that you can improve that.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that overview. To my other 2 panelists, don't feel the need to dig too deep for other things. You can just say, I agree. Just giving you the out before I jump to you. Malice, you're up next.
So I think the number one thing at Estrella that we do really well is the volunteerism part where we're talking about. Again, very rarely have we ever had to reach in and say, hey, we need another person to marshal this fight. Actually, I think that in Atenveldt, we do a really good job of communicating what it is that's going on, especially when it comes to individual fighters. Sometimes there's a fighter or a group of fighters that from previous years even has been a known problem. And we even talk about it in advance. And the funny thing is sometimes that person or that group of people will get offended. They'll come, hey, I heard you talked about us at the marshals meeting. Yes, we absolutely did. Do you remember last year? Because I do. And usually the problem goes away at exactly that point. The other thing that I think that we do really well, because it's very different than the other wars, is we set a really good pace at Estrella for getting stuff done. That's how we're able to have 6 scenarios in a day. It's definitely different than what I've seen at other wars on both coasts. Things that I think we do poorly. I think that we don't prepare a person for their first time marshaling on the field at a war. Because they're bright and shiny, they're a fighter, maybe they've been authorized for a year and they got injured, but they were still going to come to war, and they're like, all right, since I can't fight and I'm injured, I'm going to go out and marshal. I just got railroaded by fighters. I don't know what just happened. So I think that's something we can definitely improve. I think another thing that we can improve upon is the communication year to year as to what is that's going on. So when it's the same person running things, pretty easy. But when it's a different person running things, not necessarily are we keeping that communication. And to be honest, sometimes that person doesn't even want the communications because they want to do it their way versus taking the history of what has worked and unfortunately what has not worked over the course of time. A third thing that I think that we don't do well is sometimes we don't take ourselves out when we need to get out. Sometimes it's because I've been marshaling in the field all day. I'm hot. I'm stupid. I forgot to drink water and I'm going to fall down. So I get to camp and somebody goes, you're not a normal color. So I think that watching over ourselves is probably something that goes along with that. And not just ourselves as in me, but me keeping an eye on the other marshals and the other marshals keeping an eye on me.
That's actually a really, really good point because marshals, while they're not out there exerting themselves in the same way that fighters are, they don't always listen to the water bearers because they're also there for safety. Yeah, I see you, Darius. What color were you 2 Pensics ago?
Oh, that was the time that I was trying to marshal and fight and such when I had that infection that caused my tongue to swell and I couldn't actually eat anything. Yeah, that was a brilliant idea for me to be on the field. Don't be me.
Well, with that segue, Darius, last but not least, 3 things we do well and 3 things we do poorly.
Overall, wow, to narrow it down to 3 things that our marshaling corps does well. There's always volunteers. While we do have to go and ask for more people sometimes, we don't usually have to force people to take their armor off. We can usually get volunteers. That part always goes pretty well. Very rarely do we see any particular bias in one particular direction or another come from our marshals. They've honestly, at least what I've seen, and I haven't received any complaints about these, is the bias level of it is, yeah, they might have been right. Or, okay, in discussion, I can see why they were saying that. So overall, marshaling pretty good, besides numbers. As far as bad things, I love our marshals. I really do. I really hate hearing rules from 10 years ago that haven't been a rule in 10 years and are specifically in the Penzic rulebook as not being that thing anymore, or even in the last 5 years. So just knowing the rules and knowing the current rules versus what they remember the rules to be, please, for the love of God, read the rulebook. And that's not because I don't love you. I have to go read it too, especially because there's a new one and we just took a year off. Escalation and not knowing that they can use an escalation. They don't have to be the endpoint of something. They can just observe and report. And usable observations. Well, I don't know. It was a guy in a black and gold tabard. Okay. What kind of black and gold? What was on it? Well, it was a lightning bolt or a tornado or a star.
They were wearing a black helmet.
I would love to do something with that, but unless you can point them out to me, I kind of just have to remind everybody, hey, folks, calibration's a thing. Please try to use it.
It's that guy in the
Yeah,
sweater.
my favorite is always they were dressed in all black.
Yeah. Well, they were wearing a pail.
Half the people out here, even though it's Penzic.
They were about 5'9" and wearing a mid-realm pail. Besides that, I know they had a sword and a dagger.
So for anyone who's never been to Penzic, the Mid-Realm is one of the principles in the war. And there's a saying in the Mid-Realm, if you want to be legit, slap a dragon or a pail on it. So everyone has those tabards. Just the background.
Kingdom,
we call it goat coats in Glenavon.
Well, I wanted to jump back to you, Binn, because you raised your hand in our kind of behind the scenes chat about your third thing.
Oh yeah, so I did think of a third thing that we do bad, and it's that's the way we've always done it. You know, you got to rethink those things or figure out why it was done that way in the first place, and that comes from lineage. You know, where 6 marshals ago, there was an incident. You know, but you can't just do things because that's the way it's always been done. You have to really think through it every year, and rewrite the rule book and figure out why. And like you said, for the love of God, please read the rule book every year because it changes. And that's one of the biggest jobs that we do at Gulf, at least. You know, a month or two before the war starts, we're writing down and going through the rules and making sure that they are clear and concise and cover new conventions, new authorizations, new weapons, whatever. And getting all that approved and, up the chain. So that's something that changes every year and you have to read it.
Perfect. And I love, sorry, Darius.
That's okay. The timeline of how things happen is specifically for Penzic, a lot of this stuff gets printed in May. Mm-hmm. So this stuff, we're not using it until July, August, but it got printed in May. A lot of times the war scenarios are talked about by the royals in December, January. There's a lot of times that everything is approved by the end of January.
Yeah.
Those things are all going to print. They may or may not have been through command staff. They may or may not been through marshals to take a look at things to see if anything would work. They may or may not have been through Penzic field staff to see if logistics are even possible for some of these things. Yeah. But yeah, so a lot of times, this stuff was written in, January and put to print in May, and we have time to look at it and then find that mistake of, wow, people are going to read that. How do we let them know that that's not actually how that's going to be?
Yeah.
But luckily, we've gotten much better about that too.
Same thing. Gulf Wars is in the second week of March, and it's like November 1st is our deadline for print. Everything has to be to the autocrats and everybody else just to get to the print shop. So, the royals are talking about planning in June, July. And, so it's a lot of work way before the war that goes on. As far as last minute changes to rules, we have a big we call it the sandwich board that sits up at the marshal's tent that has last minute rule changes or announcements, things like that, because invariably there are those last minute changes. So
about that sandwich board, I had to miss Gulf Wars 2019, and thankfully somebody sent me a picture of the sandwich board.
Oh no!
Because it announced the birth of my son, which was the reason I missed. So, and Hawk had written at the top, squishy and birth date and birth weight, and it was just like the most awesome thing to have that. And like you say, it's useful for actual announcements if people read it. But it has a very fond place in my heart because of that.
So don't make him use it when he's marshal in charge in the next couple of years for anything bullshitty. Excuse my language. All right. I wanted to say thank you to my panelists because you guys keep jumping the sharks on my outline. So
not jumping the sharks, jumping ahead.
Jumping ahead.
This show will never jump the shark.
Fetch me some water skis and a shark. All right. So yeah, I wore the sweatshirt just for that joke. So we touched on this a little bit, especially Malice. Thank you very much. What is one way you would improve marshalate training if you could do just about anything? What's the one thing you would teach your new marshals before they got to war? Darius, you first.
I can include this all in one because now with the new society and kingdom rules, it's all included now. It's all the things that we looked at as a group prior and said, hey, that should be a rule, and now they are. Knowing the rules and observational hierarchy, which is included in that. Not everything has to be a big blow up. It can just be a, hey, please stop doing that. Hey, you can let somebody else be the bad guy. Please, that's what they pay me for, or actually, that's what I volunteered for. I will be the bad guy. I don't care if people like me at the end if they were safe. If someone gets hurt because I didn't do something, I'm going to feel horrible.
Perfect. Thank you for that overview. Binn, you're next. What's the one thing you would teach the marshalate as a whole, if you could, to make your job easier?
Oh my goodness. I can't be short about this. Me and Hawk and several other people just had a big, long sit down about how to send a book home with the marshals so that they can practice for the next war. So things like that. I think that's what I would have. I would have an end of war wrap up with all the marshals and saying, here's what you learned. Here's what you could do better. Here's what you did fantastic. Take that home with you and teach others.
Perfect. That is actually an excellent point, and we're back to read the damn rules. All right, Malice, since you spurred this question.
For me, the number one thing that I instill in marshals when they're going to go marshal at Estrella is no matter what's on that person's head, no matter what is around their neck, you are the marshal. They do not outrank you when you're on the field.
Perfect. That is actually really great practical advice. Having been yelled at by an MOD who was breaking the rules when I yelled at him as a marshal. Yeah, thanks. I really wish they could take that away with them.
It wasn't me, right?
What?
It wasn't me, right?
No, it was not you. And it was actually not melee related, but I did have the rank card pulled on me, which...
Oh, that's unfortunate. I've seen it happen, and I try to make sure, just like, Malice said, make sure your marshals know that they are God on the field.
Yep. And it's something that it happened 5 years ago, and it's still with me. So imagine someone who's a little less, I'm definitely not a shrinking violence.
and you know everybody, so it's not like some stranger with a pointy hat is walking up to you.
Do not know everybody.
So a quick follow-up on that from me, too, is as the marshal in charge, I also try to instill in people, yes, you are in charge. Yes, I will 100% have your back, even if you're wrong, and we'll talk about it later.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, just like as a message to any marshal, even a marshal in training, that is that's great. And I especially as Master of Defense, like I'll back that, and whether I'm associated with them or not. I think that it's on us to be like, oh, what did the marshal say?
Mhm.
Then that's what they said. So yeah, thank you.
So that's a really good segue because it touches upon some biases that we have with our award system. I wanted to open the floor in our marshalate at these larger wars where winning does matter to some people. Don't go all at once. Oh, I will call you out if I have to.
I'll
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
How do you avoid the referee problem in the marshalate, especially at wars where people do sometimes care who wins and who loses?
You have to make sure that the issues go to the right tier of people. Sometimes it has to end up being a hard conversation between the KRM and the KEM and the crown or crowns. And sometimes the designated adults have to be the designated adults.
I think that's excellent advice. And we're back to talking about the tiers and escalation versus trying to handle all of the problems yourself.
Yeah, sorry if I had stepped on Binn's toes.
No. It's very, yeah. No, you said it better than I was thinking it.
Perfect. All right. I'm gonna move on now because I've been aching to get to the practical advice for Joe Schmo, Fencer Bro, and talk a little bit. You guys have already touched on the volunteerism aspect and the service aspect and the fact that there's almost no problem getting people out there to marshal. But how do we standardize what the marshalate should be looking for other than read the damn rules? Because I think that is an excellent rule. But is there anything that we do to help prepare our marshalate and anything we could be doing further to prepare the marshals for big wars? I know Malice mentioned pre-war meetings. I know Darius mentioned months in advance planning out the rules for Pennsic. I know that was mentioned for Gulf Wars as well. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, for especially for the big. Sorry to jump on anybody. For the big battles, sorry, managed to choke. We have like a marshal's huddle before every battle. So like the field battle, we have, the two sides lined up on either side of the field, and we count the numbers, make sure it's all even and everything. But before we start, we have like a maybe 5-10 minute huddle where all the marshals come in, and then we go over little conventions and things. Here's what your job is. Here's what you are looking for. Here's where you called a hold. If you hear a hold, here's what you do. We have these little things like on the field battle, especially. If a hold is called, all fighters take a knee. And what that helps is the marshals to see over the crowd so that they can find the problem and gather there and go there. The marshal that called the hold holds their stick straight up. Everyone that hears a hold, also if you hear a hold, you call hold too, and you point your stick at the guy who called it, and that lets the marshal in charge quickly identify where the problem is and get over there to it. Just little things like that. I mean, just getting everybody on the same page right when it's fresh in their mind, right before the battle starts. Little 5-10 minute huddle like that can last you the rest of the battle. Mm-hmm. And a real long ways getting all the marshals on the same page and playing the same song. So
one of the big things that we've done in years past is a marshals and commanders meeting where when I ran them, I was pretty militant in the way I ran them because to begin with, they were just pure chaos. We'd have 100 people sitting around trying to have a conversation and everybody talking at the same time. Mm-hmm. By the time that I was done with all of my years of running Asteorra, I had 4 principal kingdoms. So I had 4 marshals, 1 from each kingdom, 4 commanders, 1 from each kingdom, and they were the only voices that could talk. If you had a question and we're outside of that and it was a marshalate question, go talk to your marshal. If it was a command question, go talk to your commander, and we would go through every scenario start to finish, starting with the rules of war. Because the rules in every kingdom are a little bit different, obviously Asteorra is going to be different than what the rules are going to look like at Pennsic. And especially in the late 90s and early aughts, something as simple as cut length. Well, Atenveldt's cut length was, did it move? Outland's cut length was, cut has to be 12 inches long. We had to compromise somewhere in the middle because we had 4 principal kingdoms. So by able to have that meeting and have all of the people represented, whether it be command or marshal, really helped to kind of bring everyone together, know what it is that was going on. One of the big things that I noticed by the end is almost every person who I saw as a regular marshal was attending that meeting just to listen to see what it is that was going on. I tended to have it the day before scenarios started, just after dinner time. Half the people would show up with dinner on a plate, eating, listening to what it is that was going on. It was a really good way for us to get all the information out.
I think that's some excellent advice for preparing the marshalate for battles. Do you guys have any advice for people in the midst? We've heard already, make sure you're getting water, make sure you're taking care of yourself as the marshal, because you're out there just like the fighters are, and have to keep a keen eye. But do you have any practical advice for marshals while they are in the middle of the fight?
Be level-headed, be cool about it. Don't let your emotions get involved. Be objective and cool and level-headed, and the people around you will follow that.
I think that kind of follows up in what I was saying earlier too, where you are in charge. It doesn't matter what it is that is going on. You're the one who gets to make the call. One of the other things too is I encourage marshals to move to different parts of the field over the course of a day's combat, because it allows them to see, this is what your side is doing, this is what the other side is doing, see that there are differences, and those differences are pretty legit as to what it is that they're doing to prepare and to get their fighters moving and going to war.
Yeah, when I'm on the field, I try to check in with my marshals as often as I'm actually watching combat. I mean, so you can only really watch 5 or 10 people, maybe 15 people at a time with any real certainty. That's why we have however many marshals to a side and in the hotspots. So I check on them because they're doing the bulk of the observation. Not that I'm not watching while I'm doing things to see where hotspots are or where issues might pop up. So in the midst of it, you have to remember, even if you hurt or whatever else, you're going to be out in the sun or whatever weather conditions for at least an hour to 2 hours. So you have to be prepared, just like you're a combatant, to pay attention, because you're not just paying to the combatant in front of you, you're paying attention to 5, 6, 8, 10 combatants at a time, and trying to be helpful to their safety and remind them of their responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that's a great overview. Do you have any further advice for someone who's just starting out marshaling at, let's say, Pennsic or Gulf Wars or Asteorra, a large-scale war, of things they should be looking for? Because it is definitely a different beast than marshaling at like your local practice or
even like a smaller internal kingdom, like internal kingdom war event.
Yeah, for large melee events or Pennsic, first or second year, or just if people have less melee experience, take an event or even something at Pennsic where you're, hey, I'm going to be a marshal, but I'm going to pair up with a more experienced marshal. Or let me know that you're a less experienced marshal and would be more comfortable with a partner, so you can learn and watch and see and talk to somebody and have them see what's going on. And marshaling, while the wars are a big spotlight on what marshals are doing, marshaling experience doesn't just happen. Okay, great. I've marshaled 15 Pennsics. Okay, do you marshal the rest of the year? Where are you actually getting your experience? talk to your local marshals, pay attention in Kingdom, learn year round.
No, I think that's great practical advice. Binn, Malice, do you have anything you want to add?
I do. So for those people who are just starting out and wanting to kind of dip their foot into a little more responsibility, we allow each tournament to have its own marshal in charge of the tournament. Take that on. Talk to the person who's traditionally run it, see if it's something that you can help out with, see if it's something that you can learn from, because I will tell you, marshaling a tournament with 8 people or 12 people or even 25 people in it is a whole different animal than marshaling something at Atenveldt and running it when there's 125 people in a list.
Yeah. Just go to the more experienced marshal. As far as I'm concerned, if you're not marshaling in your kingdom, in your local group, you're not going to grow as a fencer in either the stair steps of awards or as a fencer, just some guy who goes out there and fences. You're not going to grow unless you're marshaling. So take that experience to the field and to the war and volunteer and learn. And if you see people who faces you've seen before who are always out there marshaling, go ask them for advice. Go find out who the MIC is and say, hey, how can I help? Here's my experience. How can I help?
Thank you guys very much. That is some of the stuff I really wanted to touch on with this talk. One of the other questions I have for you is, when you are marshaling, how do you put aside the fact that half of the people might be your closest friends and you might not know the other people from Adam? I know Darius touched on this a little bit in discussing the Purple Wars with Penzik, in which 2 principals decided they were besties. Is there any advice you have for people who are out there marshaling on putting some of those friendships aside so that they can be objective observers?
So for me, I think one of the big things is, if you're running things, if you make sure the other side has more fun, there's more of the other side next year, and that makes everyone have more fun in the future.
Okay. I think that's excellent insight. Anyone else?
I think part of being a marshal is just being impartial. They even rhyme now that I said it out loud. Just that, that training for impartiality, whether it's your friend or a kingdom that you don't like. I don't know why you wouldn't like a kingdom, but that's bleeds into it. I think it's something you have to train for. If you're not just naturally out there objective and impartial, then I think the other marshals around you need to check that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where if you can be friends on and off the field, but during the lay on in between the start of the battle and the end of the battle, those are just people that you have to monitor their safety and if they're paying attention to their responsibility to others, and remind them of that. It can be harder to yell at your friends, and depending on the severity of what they're doing, maybe get somebody else to talk to them. This is another one of those things where you can observe it and kick it up the chart. And because you specifically saw your friend doing it, there's no, well, I don't know who was doing it, but they might have had some calibration. You can tell the next person up, so you don't have to be the bad guy about telling your friend, hey, kind of being a tool. Stop it.
Know your bias. Yeah, know your bias. If you feel you're biased, kick it up a notch. So I'm recording myself of this.
Or if you know that your friend is fighting in a particular part of the field, maybe if a scenario allows it, go marshal a different part of the field to remove yourself from that.
I know that was, and part of the reason I asked this question is completely personal. One of the hardest marshaling decisions I ever had to make was when my significant other rolled up on the line. So that's part of why I wanted to touch on this. So thank you guys for humoring me. So this kind of brings us into our final chapter, not our final chapter, but I want to talk a little bit about the scenarios themselves and what makes marshaling an absolute pleasure and what can make marshaling a little bit more hellish. So I'm going to actually divide our panelists up here. And Darius and Binn, I want you to think on what does a dream battle or a dream scenario look like for the marshalate, and why does it make it easier or happier for the marshalate? And what does your hell scenario look like? And while you guys are thinking about that, I'm going to jump on Malice. And Wistric and I are very curious about how Atenveldt is organized to allow for 11, 12 freaking scenarios in 2 days. How do you do it? And if you want to add in anything to your dream or your horror scenarios too, we can jump in there, but I wanted to give them a minute to think.
No problem. Don't worry. I've had plenty of dream and horror scenarios over the course of years. So the way that it's organized is that currently, so we've gone through a lot of different ways of doing this because we found things that do work and things that don't work. And sometimes it's a matter of what works for a Kingdom Rapier Marshal versus another. Currently, the Kingdom Rapier Marshal has a deputy whose job is Atenveldt 1. They work on everything. Now, in years past, we've had 4 principal kingdoms versus currently we just have 2, Atenveldt and Outlands. We also had Artemisia and Kaid as principals in the past. Lovely to get up to 4 principals again, but we'll see how that kind of goes in the future. So that person's job as the war autocrat and usually the marshal in charge is to make sure that the things in the background get done so that when war happens, it can happen in a timely manner. So for scenarios, we know that we're going to have a scenario and then another one and then another one and then another one and then another one in a row. Sometimes we'll have the scenarios on the same field and it'll be a quick 15-minute reset. Sometimes that 15-minute turns into a half an hour, and that's unfortunately when we often start losing fighters due to boredom from sitting around and just, or I'm going to go back to camp and get something to eat. This is taking forever. I think it's really effective personally when you have 2 fields that are not very far apart. Literally, there's a 15, 20-foot wide tree line between them. You can say, hey, we're going to fight this one on the broken field. We're going to fight this one on the open field. One of the things that I have done in the past is had a team that sole job was to help me as the marshal in charge to be able to go to the broken field and reset it while we were fighting another scenario on the open field and vice versa. I have to have a lot of trust in these people to be able to say, hey, this is what I need done. Here's the map. Here's the chart. This is it. I'll get out to the field as quickly as I can. So logistically speaking, when it comes to that many scenarios, it's making sure that everyone is represented in advance for me. If we allow anyone who's coming to say, hey, I have an idea for a scenario I'd like to see run, I'd love to see scenarios that are a few sentences that kind of give me an outline to where I'm able to flesh things out. Because the more I am able to write about the rule set, about how everything works, and the more I'm able to talk about at that Marshals meeting, makes it far easier for everyone to understand what it is that's going on. Mm-hmm. So when there's, 6 scenarios one day, 5 scenarios another day, should say that the other way around. We try to have more scenarios on the second day. So therefore, if one side wins everything the first day, they haven't already won. We've toyed with all sorts of different ideas on making different scenarios worth different points. In fact, one year we did make the scenarios on the first of 3 days worth a little bit more each, and we only had 3 scenarios that day versus 5 on the other 2 days. So really, it's making sure that in advance we know everything that's going on in a timeline. We know that when we say fighting starts at 10, we mean fighting's going to start at 10:30 because that's when people are actually going to figure out they should start showing up. Work those things in, knowing, hey, when we ran the scenario at war practice, and we run the scenarios over and over and over again at our war practices to see what happens on them. That way we can go, oh my goodness, I didn't even consider that thing that commander did. Well, that completely changes how that scenario can be run and how it has to be marshaled. Sometimes it's going, okay, we have to modify this in advance. So yeah, it's all logistics in advance. It's all making sure that everyone's having a good time to be able to make sure that those dream scenarios happen and those nightmare scenarios happen. So I'll let you guys go on the dream and nightmare scenarios first, and then I'll chime in with what I've had.
All right, I'm gonna start with Darius. What is your dream scenario and what is your nightmare scenario and why?
So dream scenarios, it's all about the combatants having fun. I want to see good weather. Usually most combatants get more fighting, which makes them happier in a res battle. That's easier to understand, easy rules, all clean fighting, good communication. Those are the things most people have fun with at Penzik. The opportunity to get out there, fight, have fun, and the less pressure of a bunch of rules or the one and done threat of, well, we stood around for an hour and I only got to fight for 30 seconds. Okay, cool. So that's kind of the dream scenario, which is going to be pretty easy to point out. The nightmare scenario is any time that we have to take one of those radios and call for EMS. I don't care how it happened. I don't care if it's somebody tripped over their own feet. We had somebody trip over their own feet and land on their own rapier guard that caused some injuries. We had somebody trip in the woods and cause some injury to themselves. You know, it could just be a bad reaction to heat, could be anxiety attack, whatever it is. Medical is there for a reason, and we will always call them if we have to. But those are always the days that are the worst. We're lucky that we haven't had worse injuries for how many people are there doing the thing. I think rapier as a whole is fairly low injury to others, up to some of our worst injuries are concussions. That there are people that got hurt 2-3 years ago while fencing that still aren't right because of something that happened on the rapier field. Those are our nightmare scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. It's very interesting hearing how a nightmare scenario like this is very different from a scenario planner's nightmare scenario, and how meeting in the middle helps prevent D&D town battles. I mean, wasn't going to name anything.
If there's a bunch of rules or a bunch of silly rules that people are going to have to try to even figure out what the scenario is, those are harder on the combatants. They're harder on the marshals because people are asking us what the rules are. It's like, look, we're here for safety, not necessarily for rules. Mm-hmm. We might have some input because we were part of discussions or not, but that's not necessarily what we're there for.
Yeah.
So those are harder on the marshals because it puts us in a situation where people are trying to have us handle something other than safety, which is not necessarily our purview. And heat makes it worse, and all other things make it harder. But times that we either have to stop fighting, cancel fighting, or I still say that the worst thing possible is injuries that are going to affect people past the whistle at the end of the combat.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Darius. Binn, I'm handing it over to you.
I really agree with that 100%. I mean, your best scenarios are the ones that are easy to understand. Your good weather, because good weather, it makes people less hot. When it's hot, temperatures rise, both just physically as well as the irritations and such. But yeah, res battles are always good because people just keep fighting until they're done, until they're tired of it. What you guys just touched on a little bit was the difference between somebody, the running the battle and the marshals or whoever planned the scenario. There's this constant pressure to come up with new and interesting things, and sometimes it's just keep it simple and make sure everyone's having fun that has a cool thing. Nightmare scenarios, injuries, absolutely injuries. That's the worst thing can happen. And like everyone here, I've seen injuries caused by another person. I've seen injuries just accidents where somebody, you know, somebody tore their ACL one year, just because they stepped on their foot wrong or tripped on a thing. One of the biggest hazards at Gulf Wars is fire ants. So we try our best to spray paint where the fire ants are, but those buggers travel every day, so it's hard to keep up with them. Yeah, I've had my nightmare scenario. It was the infamous. I know I keep bringing it up. The Gulf Wars in the ravine battle where I had to pull all the two-handed swords out, because it was like one of the first years where we had more than 2 or 3 two-handers. It was like a dozen on the field, maybe 15. And it just got ugly. It just straight up got ugly. I had 5 injuries on the field from two-handers. And then I saw somebody literally picked up off the ground, like being hit. And I was like, it's done. Get them off my field. So yeah, that was my nightmare.
Oof. Thank you for sharing. I know Malice wanted to touch on his dream and his nightmare scenario.
So I'm pretty much in there with you guys. Dream scenarios is when the weather is right. One big thing for us is if it's overcast, it's a big benefit, because the sun being as bright as it is out here, even in February, makes vision hard for the fighters and for the marshals. Plus, sweat dripping into the eyes isn't necessarily the best thing either. So another big thing for me for a dream scenario is when fighters at the end are saying what a good time that they had on it, or if I see it posted in their kingdom's message boards, you wouldn't believe this thing that they did in Australia. It was so much fun. I don't entirely remember how it all worked, but and then people will come back and ask, what in the world were you doing? I said, well, here's the rules and here's how it works. This is why this was so much fun for everybody. Because for me, if they're having a good time and they get more people to come next year, like I said earlier, that's where I'm finding things that it's really successful for me. Nightmare scenarios, yeah, I'm with you guys too. We had a spiral fracture from a guy climbing up a slight incline. Spiral fractured his shin bone. Fell down screaming. We had no idea what was going on. He wasn't vocal about it. Obviously, we called a hold. Everybody dropped their gear where they were. That's a convention that we use that I don't know that other kingdoms do. When a big hold is called, drop your helmet where you are so you know where you are and can come back to it, provided you're not in the line of EMS, obviously. So yeah, anytime that we have to get on the radio, anytime we have to call medical, worst is when you have to call an ambulance or a medevac chopper to the field. Another bad for me, and obviously in a very different way, is when I see fighters who haven't yet had the opportunity to fight, because let's say a bridge battle is going completely the wrong way than the marshals expected, and they start getting bored and leave. That's another thing to me, is where it's a nightmare unsuccessful scenario, to where as the marshal, I probably could have done something to facilitate fighting being better. Who knows what that would be? That's something to look at later and try to improve for the following year.
Very cool. And it's interesting because with this range of wars, we've heard a range of ways that wars are negotiated and scenarios are negotiated as well, which kind of brings me to the next question that Wistric brought up, which is, what are some considerations for scenario planners to help their marshalate? And what can you do if your Royals negotiation team or Rapier Marshal in charge, or Rapier Autocrat was the thing from Australia, I believe. What do you do when they need significant counsel on how Rapier should work and what's safe and what's not? I'm going to open it to the floor. Feel free to chime in and go.
So in Gulf Wars, the war points are planned out by the Royals, and we have traditions. We have the 4 different war points, and those are, it's going to be the field battle, it's going to be the castle or the fort battle, a new town battle, and the ravine. And those are pretty much, the same thing every year. The rest of the scenarios or individual tournaments and things like that, we rely on the kingdom who's hosting it, or group, or I mean, it might just be a person hosting it. So there's a lot of traditional tournaments that happen every year, and sometimes there's like a new thing, that happens that a group is sponsoring, and they just have to get with us and schedule it out. But we'll always review the scenarios and try to figure out, oh, that's not safe. Yeah. Oh, Champions Tourney. I'm sorry. Champions is a war point as well. That's 5 war points. Sorry. Been discounting this the whole time. But yeah, it's the responsibilities of the kingdoms and the what do you call it? The person, the war commander for that kingdom, to really get with us, the staff, the marshals in charge of the war, to bring those to our attention. So one, we can get them printed in the book. To review if they're safe, or reverse those. But anyway, yeah, sorry. We rely on the individual kingdoms and groups.
No worries. Is there any piece of advice that you would give to your war commander in determining if a scenario is safe off the bat?
Fortunately, most of the time, if you're a war commander or a kingdom rapier marshal, you've got enough experience that you're going to be able to, guaranteed. You're going to have enough experience to make that call before it even gets to the rapier marshal in charge of the war.
Perfect. It sounds like the tiered things we've been kind of touching on are actually working for Gulf Wars. All right. Opening the floor again.
So we had an incident like you were talking about when things got changed outside of what our parameters were. And this was quite some time ago. Let me look at my calendar. I think 2003. We had 4 principal kingdoms. The 4 kingdom marshals or their delegates worked out what the scenarios were, turned in the scenarios. Everything was great. They went to treaty negotiations. They came back, and we literally were supposed to be fighting on the same field as heavies at the same time. They took scenarios. They took one part of one scenario and embedded it into another part of a scenario where things were honestly completely unworkable. Luckily, at the time, we had a process for when things don't work, this is what you do. And it's extremely important for the person who's running things to know what that process is and how to deal with it. Well, to make a long story really funny, somebody copy and pasted a whole bunch of things, and they actually didn't change anything in our scenarios whatsoever and said that they were good to go. But what we had done, because what our protocol was to make suggestions on how they can be fixed with the 4 principal kingdom rapier marshals, submit them back to your crowns, to which I did. And my crown says, we didn't change anything. Why is this different? And then there was another issue with the person running treaty negotiations didn't take care of things effectively. So luckily, for the most part, counseling just comes down to, hey, this is a thing that doesn't work, and here's why. And since, like you guys, we're in a far enough timeline in advance that we don't have to worry about it. Normally, our treaty is pretty much set, say, October for our wars that were in February, which tells me that I'm going to guess we're probably talking June now that we're moving to November, which gives us plenty of opportunity to run those scenarios in advance, determine what does and what doesn't work, and to be able to come up with plans to make changes going forward.
Thank you very much. Darius, last but not least.
Yeah, so Penzic. Wow. So the marshalet doesn't get involved in most of those things. We don't plan the scenarios. There's a whole group of folks, the rapier commander, the generals, the crowns. There's a whole team of folks that handle that stuff. We give them a read over when we're allowed to, when we're included, to see that everything has been covered in the rule book that needs to be, or if there are special rules for the scenario that need to be discussed. So as far as war points, that stuff's all handled. Anything that's going to use any of the rapier space outside of those war points, we have 2 large fields and 6 or 8 smaller fields that can be signed up for by anybody. You can have people teaching classes. You can have people doing combat. You can have people doing 3-on-3 melees in a field or 5-on-5 melees. You can have people running res battles where they're setting up poles and tape and ropes to mark off boats for people to fight on and res points. And and there's a whole scheduling system for that. That the rapier marshal it is not particularly a part of. We get to see all that stuff, but we don't necessarily control all that stuff. So most of those things they're signed up for, the space is reserved, but they have their own marshaling corps that's supposed to take care of those activities, while there are supporting marshals to do inspections, to help run, like be ministers of the MOLs if they need them, to just make sure the water is filled, and to watch general safety and advise on things that come up, or to be extra marshals if people need them. But the planning of it, logistics-wise, we're not as necessarily involved in that. We have whole teams of folks that handle that.
So if you could give those teams of folks one piece of advice, like for the sake of the marshalate at Pennsic, what would that piece of advice be?
Be as self-sufficient as possible, but know that there's help and people that you should be talking to. Like, I don't care who wants to use the space. You can reserve the space. There's a system for that. Be mindful of your combatants. Be mindful of the space. Be mindful of yourselves. Be as self-sufficient as possible, but don't go walking past the marshal's tent with a broken weapon that we just watched break on the field and then be like, oh, no, it's good. I don't have to report that. Yeah, actually you do. Please step over here. No. I told the marshal, you, please, come here. Luckily, we have very few of those. But those are the ones that we know about. With that many combatants in that large of a space, it's hard to know about everything. And that's partly where we're lucky that people are as self-responsible as they are. Now, in a perfect world, we would know more about all of those things that happen.
Perfect. And I think that's a really good place to kind of leave it, which is to be self-sufficient and don't be afraid to use the resources that the marshal, the marshalate are providing for you. And we've heard that kind of across the board, whether it's pulling people because there were way more two-handers on the field than people were used to, and things were getting dangerous, or it's calling things because of weather, or it's actually reporting things up the chain when they need to be reported. We've learned a lot about what people should be doing, and there's a lot of good practical advice for both being a marshal and utilizing the marshalate at these big wars. So I guess I kind of want to wrap up. If you've followed the show before, we're of course going to have the no shit there I was portion of this evening, which is I'm hoping to ask our panelists about the weird and wacky don't be that guy story as a marshal, to give you guys the warning that you need now. But to wrap this up, how do you judge whether or not you as the marshalate were successful? We've heard a couple of great one-liners from thank you for the offensive language warning. We've heard a couple of great one-liners from Darius about being self-sufficient, or from Malice about how much fun people are having and whether or not they actually want to return to Asteorra, or from Binn, which had to do with I just want people to have fun. How do you know you were successful as the marshal in charge? How do you make sure that you're successful in years to come? Loaded question, I know. But the floor is open.
So I think an easy one is if there aren't injuries, there's definitely an element of success there. Because some injuries can be easily kind of mitigated in advance. If we know what it is, the field that we're fighting on, we're prepared for everything that's going to happen in a regular situation. Of course, those odd ones will come up. We're going to be in a better place. So the fewer injury reports we have, the less severe those injuries are, the more successful we are. And I think that the other side too is, as I said before, is if people want to continue coming, if more people want to come, if they want to bring their friends next year, that's success.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, just exactly that. I'll only, add to that second to that, because that is the best point right there. If people are going away uninjured and want to come back. So I mentioned at the very beginning of this is you start building up a group of friends that you see every year, especially in the marshaling circuit where you have a bunch of respected and trusted marshals that help you out every year. You get a dozen marshals that you see and you trust. You're like, okay, I'm in good hands. And if those guys come back and help you the next year, I mean, you couldn't have done too bad.
Perfect.
Yeah, people having fun, wanting to come back, having an interest in maybe they were a combatant, maybe volunteering some time next year to marshal. Not hearing about how poorly people thought they were treated by the marshal. There's a lot of people can take the, yeah, I probably deserved that warning versus the, well, the marshal's just picking on me.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, we love to not, ideally there would never be an injury. If there are injuries, we need to know about them, no matter how severe, so that we do know how to try to equate for them next time. If we don't know they happened, we have no way of knowing how to try to fix it for next time, to try to mitigate somebody else having to go through that. So that's a bit of a downer, but overall, yeah, you just want people to have a good time and want to come back and not hear, the things like, well, people thought they were being picked on. Well, were you being picked on? Was it something we need to talk to the marshal about, or were you doing something you shouldn't have been?
I think that's actually, I don't think that's a downer at all. I think that's a great place to leave it. And considering that some of the advice given today was, I don't care if they like me at the end, as long as they were safe. And the real emphasis on fun for combatants and safety for the marshalate, and leaving your biases at the door have been some really great takeaways from this entire discussion this evening. So I just want to say thank you to you guys for being here and talking us through this. And I hope that the audience will take away, if they take away anything, for the love of God, please read the rules and scenarios before you get there. And if you're marshaling, don't be afraid to tap other marshals with a little more experience for help. Whether it's because you're dealing with a friend or someone you don't necessarily like, or it's just something that's beyond.
And if you don't know who to ask, these people.
Provide observations to the closest marshal you can find. If they can't help you, grab another marshal. Luckily, at least at Penzic, we're usually wearing black and yellow and stripes, and we're visible. But find somebody until they can tell you who can find you the person who can help.
Yep, absolutely. So if you take anything away from this, don't be afraid to find a marshal, whether you're marshaling or a combatant. And going from there, all right. So if you've been with us before, we always conclude with no shit there I was stories. I warned our panelists about this, but I'm hoping that they'll have something lighthearted, don't be that guy, because of some weird, wacky, heat-stroked person on the field at their respective wars. So, who wants to go first?
While they are sharing their stories, audience, if you've got questions that you haven't posted yet, go ahead, drop them in the comments on the Facebook live stream, drop them, or on YouTube, wherever you're watching this. If you're watching it real time, throw your questions at us. Once we're done with hearing all about the goobiest of the goobs, we'll get to your questions, and we want to make sure that you take away everything you can from this episode. So, back to Bruce.
Oh, no. Back to our panelists. Give me your. I'm ready for these stories. Who wants to start?
I don't know about one there. Oh shit, there I was story, because there's so many. After going to years and years of these, you just get a collection. But something that stands out to me was my first year of being marshal in charge, and we were having the little huddle in the middle of the field with the primary marshals in the field battle, and this guy. He just takes off from his line. Everyone's supposed to stay behind their line until the battle starts. He just walks up to the marshal's circle, and we all turn and look at him. We're like, okay, who are you and why are you here? We're having a little huddle, right? And he takes his rapier, he holds the tip, and he holds the handle, and he goes whoop, and touches the tip to the pommel. And he does like that like 2 or 3 times. And we're all just like, what is going on? And he just like, it's a very flexible blade. I just don't want you guys to think I'm ganking anybody. And he turns around and walks off.
Thank you for sharing.
It may not be the best story, but it stuck with me.
I know that that would have been a thank you for sharing, honey.
If your blade can do that, why are people still accusing you of ganking them? There's layers to this.
I get, I don't know. It's just like if you saw that as a marshal, if you saw somebody just planting their tip and bending their sword in half, yeah, I would call a hold right then. So I understand why he did it. Maybe that happened to him before.
This is my new gesture for there I was stories. All right, Malice, you got one for us.
I sure do. So one of our definitions that we use at Estrella is a pretty simple one of running, and that is at no point can both of your feet be off the ground at the same time. So apparently we didn't understand that some people didn't understand that this included long jumping across areas of the field in an assisted manner. We had a ship-to-ship battle where we literally had a fighter thrown from one ship to the other ship 14 feet away, which was the distance we used because we thought that was pretty safe because you couldn't make an actual sword engagement across it. But you could from the planks that were across the ships. But literally, a fighter went flying through the air. The best part was it was at my side. It was the other side that had done it. The fighter who they happened to come down nearest literally watches him in the air, takes his buckler and hard parries his sword out of the way, waits for him to land and punks him in the head and goes, "You good?" And just continues on with the rest of the fight as the marshal standing there, hold. So we then had to redefine that any action that had both of your feet off the ground at the same time was considered to be running and therefore not allowed. I'm so glad no injury resulted from that because I just watched things fly through my head as I watched him fly through the air.
That's one of those, just because you can doesn't mean.
Just because you saw it in an Errol Flynn movie doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Yeah.
All right.
Just because there's a porta-john on the field does not mean that you can camp in it and then jump out of it once the enemy line has passed.
Wait, did this actually happen?
At Penzic in the woods.
There was a porta-john?
There's a porta-john on one part of the field that we didn't think was going to see that much combat, and I don't believe is normally there. But it was on the field at like one of the edges of like the flat sandy areas, and there was some fighting around it. A person went into it. I don't know if they used it or not. That's not part of the story that I know about. But they waited until the opponent line went past them. They hopped out of the porta-john and started dealing people.
Oh my goodness.
Also, if you're going to try to attack people over natural boundaries, like trees that have fallen over, try not to do so in such a way that you Superman yourself so that you're stuck up on top of the tree on a branch by your belt that may or may not be part of your regalia.
I like seeing Wistric's face going, damn, I can't hide in the porta-john now.
No, because I had that thought of like,
It's like,
one person.
They did it in a completely safe manner. It was just one of those things. It's just like we have to discuss why. Okay, there's rule bending, and then there's
It's on the field.
well, yeah, it's there. You could have done so, but it was just one of those things. It's like, okay, any actual occupiable structures that happen to be on the list are not for use as combat or tactical decision purposes.
Also, the enemy like the opposing force, how did they not see a guy open the porta-john, step into it?
Well, because of the way it was, where it was positioned, like it was part of it was almost on like a travel path. So people would just move past it, and then the guy was like looking out the vents. It's like, okay, they're past me. Snuck out the door and started DFBing folks.
But would it have been different if he actually had to use it and wasn't using it tactically?
I don't. That does not fall under safety. That is one of those things that a marshal should be discussing.
Sorry, Darius. I didn't mean to put you on.
In the same vein of before you go, that's something you should have thought about before you got to the field. Because then, in theory, if it was a male, we have to ask them to be re-inspected because there's no way that they should have been able to do that without touching parts of their armor. Hopefully, that's the least offensive thing I say to Steven. For Golf Wars, where I think I'm the only person that has caused a combat archery hold in a rapier ravine battle. There were bolts that were stuck in the tree, and it was windy that day, and a bolt fell out of the sky and hit me in the foot. And the marshal had been standing right beside me. I said, "Hey, I'm not taking that," which was their eyes were as big as dinner plates because they thought somebody fired a bolt into active combat, and just started yelling, "Hold of me!" I'm like, "Calm down, dude. It fell out of the tree." And then there was
Well, thank you for sharing, Darius. And I'm very proud of you that was the most offensive thing you've said this evening. And by proud, I mean, what? You were holding out on us.
Kids might be watching, maintain some decorum.
No. I know Binn wanted to pop up with one more story, considering everyone in the chat knows the person in question, and I have definitely heard it from the other side.
So this was probably one of my first Gulf War. It was when I was rapier in charge. Those were my best stories. I guess I was just new and naive. So we were talking earlier about when you put a sticker on somebody's mask for inspecting them, you write your name, your initials, and your entrance number. So everyone gets a medallion at Gulf Wars, and it has a unique number on it. So everyone has a unique number. So the marshals put their number on stickers they inspected. It just makes it easier. So that in mind, knowing that there is a sticker on somebody and I will know who inspected them, I was walking up the first couple of days at war, and I was walking up to the marshal's tent to get the paperwork out and start the day. And there was already some fencers on the field, as there usually are, just doing pickups and warm-ups and having fun. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a young lady who has no pants on. And my head whips over, and my first reaction is, who is the marshal who inspected her in? I want their card now. I want to know who inspected them in. And so I march over the field and to see this young lady. And as I get closer, I see, she has tights on. She has skin-colored tights under a little dress, and okay, everything's cool, everything's good, and that is how I met Azrael LaFay. Was I was going to have a marshal's head over that.
I actually had to ask her about those tights because being a female marshal, I was like, how are these abrasion resistant and puncture proof? And she's like, and that's how I learned everything I now know about figure skating tights.
Yeah.
Apparently those things are to withstand skating blades.
Yeah, they're sturdy tights. It's just, 50 yards down the field, you just see somebody out there fencing without pants on, and I have questions.
All right. Well, I've let both of you share twice. Malice, do you have any others you'd like to share this evening before I let Wistric sign us off?
Oh, goodness. Let's see here. So we had a fighter get a little uppity with the marshals. So all of the marshals were given that person's name. And in the next scenario, as that person passed each marshal, the marshal called them up by name. Hi, how are you doing? Well, this didn't sit well with that person. So the next day, their entire unit decided that that was their name. And that was one of the few times I've actually had to have an actual marshal's court because, well, we then had to have a conversation about how this is unacceptable and inappropriate to camouflage yourself and your entire unit as one another so as they can't be identified as an individual fighter.
Yeah.
I have a.
We've had some fun with it, Rhea.
No.
Sorry, Ben.
I just thought of a question I had. This is one of those rumors or wild tales that I heard happened at a war, and I just want confirmation. I can't remember if it was Pinzik or Estrella or Lily's War or something, but all the fencers walked out with doors for shield, like these giant plywood shields. And so the opposing team decided, you know what, we're going to get some plungers. Some toilet plungers, and stuck them to the shield, pulled them aside, and then stabbed them.
That happened.
I heard. So I've heard about a plunger tip thingy at a Gulf Wars. Is this more than that?
I saw it happen at a Penzik on the rattan field. I don't recall that happening in the time that I've known in Rapier at Penzik. I'm not saying it didn't happen. The time I saw it, it was with rattan.
Okay. Well, maybe the story morphed over time. You know how those happen. But okay, I just wanted confirmation because like maybe one of you guys actually saw this.
I can tell you we've had plenty of times where we've had door shields on the field, but at no point have I ever seen plungers.
I kind of appreciate, though, that it is our representative from Gulf Wars with the shield size and shape rules. Asking about the no shit there I was shield story. All right. Well, I wanted to thank you all for being here tonight, viewers, panelists. Thank you for taking time out of your busy and hell-ridden schedules. I know that this quarantine has been kind of rough on all of us. So I'm going to let Wistric wrap before we head over to the Let's Be Social Zoom. And Wistric, take it away.
All right. So again, to echo Bruce, thank you all for joining us. Audience, thank you for joining us. If you're on the Facebook live chat, I just dropped a link to the Zoom room. I'm going to fire that up in a minute. We'll go hang out there, say all the things that we did not say during the episode because some stories don't need to be told when cameras are rolling.
Statute of limitations.
Ain't no such thing in the SCA. Trust me. Anyway, I had to move kingdoms for people to forget about things. So the other thing, the only way we get to have wars in the fall is if the U.S. gets COVID under control. It's looking like we're going to have enough vaccines coming in to have everybody vaccinated by the end of summer. If you like rapier melee, like we do, and you want to be able to join us on the field, then the way we get there is you get vaccinated when you can, and you wear a mask, because they don't know yet whether the vaccine keeps you from transmitting the disease, even though you're not symptomatic. So please, for my sake, do what you can to ensure that we can all gather together as friends in large groups without violating any common sense. Cleansing would be nice. Goal
And
Force
just
in October.
on one another, because we've all been off for a year. So even when we are back together, don't be hard on yourselves. Don't be hard on your friends. Don't be hard on your opponents.
I don't know about everybody else, but this past week was the first time I've exercised in 6 months. I should not throw a lunge at a human being right now. Yeah.
And
it's going to be a rough first couple events, first couple wars. We're going to need to take it easy on each other, but let's get to have them. Stay healthy, keep your friends healthy, keep your neighbors healthy, so that we can finally fight the world in person.
And if COVID doesn't wrap soon, you're going to have to deal with Wistric and I's smiling faces on more of these streams. So
and I slip further and further into deranged madness.
Trust us, we have a Star Wars episode planned because it seemed like a good idea at the time. All right? All right.
The first episode we have planned. We will torture you all. We want to fight. Let's fight. It'll be great. All right. With that, thank you all for joining us again. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you so much.